how much of what was physical manifestation in brackets about Bhagavan is a model for us?
Right, okay, good question. Yes, Bhagavan's outward life was exemplary. Bhagavan's, the outward contact, we can learn a lot from the outward conduct of Bhagavan, how he conducted himself in the world. We can learn a lot from that. But one problem is most of us were born after Bhagavan left the body, so we never had the good fortune of seeing Bhagavan in physical form. Of course, there are lots of books with lots of stories, but we have to remember when we read stories about Bhagavan, each one of us see Bhagavan through our own colored glasses. When I first went to Tiruvannamalai, it was in the mid-1970s. So at that time, there were still a lot of old devotees who had lived many years with Bhagavan. And sometimes I would hear a story from one old devotee. And if I mentioned that story, as I was told by one old devotee to someone else, they'll say, no, 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 I was there at that time. It wasn't like that. It was like this. So sometimes there were certain incidents that happened, but I heard different versions from different people who were all there at the time, because everyone sees the same thing through their own colored glasses. They interpret it in their own way, and they understand it in their own way. So when it comes to stories about Bhagavan, we have to take them with a pinch of salt, because none of us know Bhagavan. In order to know Bhagavan as he actually is, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. In other words, we need to lose ourselves completely in Bhagavan, then only we will know him. So long as we're knowing him through our mind, we are knowing him imperfectly. We are not knowing him as he actually is. But that's, so with that caution, but we shouldn't, we should always, whatever stories we hear, we have to, as I say, we have to take with a pinch of salt. But from all the stories we read about Bhagavan, we all have a general picture of how Bhagavan lived his life. Maybe a more or less accurate picture, but we know more or less how Bhagavan was, how Bhagavan dealt with different situations, how he was completely detached, but at the same time was so kind and loving. I mean, it's hard to describe Bhagavan in words. No words can adequately describe him, but we get a general idea of how Bhagavan was. I remember once Swaminathanananda telling me that when we live our life in this world, a very good guide to how we should behave in this world, whenever we are, whatever situation we find ourselves in, if we think to ourselves, how would Bhagavan respond in this situation? That is a very good guide. Because Bhagavan didn't, there's so many things were happening around Bhagavan. Bhagavan never overreacted to any situation. Sometimes he would seem to act in a very firm way. Sometimes he'd seem to be completely indifferent. But one thing, he never overreacts. If he reacts, it's because for a purpose. So, of course, we can't know exactly how Bhagavan would act in each situation, but according to the best of our understanding, if we think how Bhagavan would act in this situation, supposing someone says something unkind to us and we're hurt, we may feel inclined to say something harsh back to them. But what would Bhagavan have done? He would have been indifferent to it. So we should be indifferent to it. In that way, if we think about how Bhagavan lived his life, that can be a very good guide to us in how we should live our life. Of course, we can never live exactly like Bhagavan, but it gives us some sort of guideline, some sort of benchmark, so judging our own behavior. Would Bhagavan have behaved like this? No, he wouldn't, so I shouldn't behave like this. So yes, so the question Robert asked is, how much of what was physical within bracket manifestation of Bhagavan is a model for us? Yes, Bhagavan's outward life is a model for us. at least to a certain extent, at least to the extent to which we can understand and appreciate how Bhagavan lived in this world. But of course, Bhagavan's teachings are not primarily about how we should behave in this world. Bhagavan's teachings are about turning within and subsiding back within. How we should behave in this world is, Bhagavan has given us some very good clues, particularly towards the end of Nāṉ Ār. What he says in the last few paragraphs of Nāṉ Ār, particularly paragraphs 19 and 20, he gives us some very good pointers how we should behave in this world. In paragraph 19, he starts by talking about minds. That is, this is particularly in the context of, we see so many people in this world. Some people seem to be good, some people seem to be bad. And most of us are just a mixture of good and bad. So, but what Bhagavan says here in this context is, there are not two minds, a good mind and a bad mind. Mind is only one. Only vāsanās are of two kinds, namely Śubha and aśubha. Vāsanās means inclinations, inclination to behave in a certain, no, inclinations or propensities. How we, all our actions of mind, speech, and body, we act through mind, speech, and body under the sway of our vāsanās. So vāsanās are what determine how we behave. So Bhagavan says only vāsanās are of two kinds, namely Śubha and aśubha. Śubha means agreeable, virtuous, or good. Aśubha means disagreeable, wicked, harmful, or bad. So there are two types of vāsanās. Of course, there's not just two types. This is a generalization. Some vāsanās are more good, some vāsanās are more bad, somewhere in between. But this is just a general classification of vāsanās. Some we can generally say are good, some we can generally say are bad. And then he says, when the mind is under the sway of Śubha vāsanās, it is said to be a good mind. And when it is under the sway of aśubha vāsanās, a bad mind. So when we see a person and we see their behavior is disagreeable behavior, we say, oh, this is a bad person. What it is, why they appear to be bad is because their mind is under the sway of aśubha vāsanās, and those aśubha vāsanās it's under the sway of those aśubha vāsanās that they're behaving in a disagreeable manner. If someone behaves in a very agreeable manner, if they're very kind and generous and sympathetic and patient and have all good qualities, that is because their mind is under the sway of Śubha vāsanās. So it's not that ultimately, in the heart of all of us, it's the same self is shining, the same pure being I am is shining in the heart of all of us. But when we rise as ego, we come under the sway of our vāsanās. And the vāsanās determine how we behave in this world. If we allow ourselves to be swayed by good vāsanās, we will behave well. If we allow ourselves to be swayed by bad vāsanās, we'll behave badly. And all of us have a mixture of good and bad vāsanās in us. So it's we who have to decide whether we allow ourselves to be swayed by the bad vāsanās or by the good vāsanās. Then Bhagavan goes on to say, however bad other people may appear to be, disliking them is not proper. It's not appropriate. And then he says, very beautiful sentence, likes and dislikes are both fit to dislike. That is, the problem is not other people's behavior. The problem is our own likes and dislikes. So if we should dislike anything, the only thing we should dislike is our likes and dislikes. In other words, our aim should be to be free of likes and dislikes. So he puts it very beautifully in Tamil. Pira evolog ketava galai tondrinum. However bad others may appear to be, avagalai verital ahadu. It is not appropriate to dislike them. Then he says, virupu verupugal irendum. Both likes and dislikes, verikatakana, are fit to be disliked. So what we should really dislike is our own likes and dislikes. If we could give up our own dislikes and likes and dislikes, we would not be disturbed by the bad behavior of others. Why the bad behavior of others upsets us? Because of our own likes and dislikes. So inwardly, we need to be free of likes and dislikes. And then he goes on to say, it is not appropriate to let one's mind dwell excessively on worldly matters. That is, the more we're thinking about the world, the more we're thinking about other people, how other people are behaving, what is all the terrible things that are happening in this world, the wars and the politics and all these things that are happening and all the injustices and everything. This is only agitating our own mind to no avail. So it's not appropriate to let our mind dwell on worldly matter, because if we're following Bhagavan's path, more and more we should be turning our attention within. So if we're upset hearing about the wars that are happening in the world, if we're upset by hearing about the behavior of certain politicians, certain world leaders and everything, who am I who are getting upset about this? We should be turning our attention back to ourselves, because we can't change the behavior of others. We can change our own behavior by turning within more and more. And then he says, to the extent possible, it is not appropriate to intrude in others' affairs. In other words, we shouldn't be interfering in other people's business, where our aim is to turn within and to subside within. And then he says, all that one gives to others, one is giving only to oneself. If one knew this truth, who indeed would remain without giving? So what Bhagavan says in this paragraph is indicating to us how he himself lived in this world. So yes, it is appropriate to think about how Bhagavan lived in this world, how Bhagavan was equally kind, both to good people and to bad people. Sometimes he would seem to show even more kindness to the bad people. Sometimes the good people he would seem to ignore, because they don't need that, because if we're really following Bhagavan's path, we should be seeking him in our heart. So if he outwardly ignores us, we'll know it is because he's reminding us that he exists in our own heart. But to the people who aren't so good, he gives more attention to them, shows more kindness to them, because they're more in need of that outward grace in the outward form. We are to seek that grace within ourselves if we are truly following his path. But then the most important is the final paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. Here he really summarizes everything. How we should live in this world is expressed beautifully here. Firstly, he reminds us one of the fundamental principles of his teachings, which is what he also says in verse 26 of Valludhanapati, but here he says in slightly different words. In verse 26 of Valludhanapati, he says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. He says the same thing here, in other words. What he says here is, if oneself rises, everything rises. If oneself subsides, everything subsides. So oneself here, the self that rises is ego. So if we rise as ego, everything else will rise. Everything else comes into existence. If we subside back within, everything else will subside back within. So if we want to solve all the problems of the world, to set right all the injustices, put an end to all the wars, what do we have to do? We have to subside back into our own heart. Then in the next sentence, this is one of the most important sentences in Bhagavan's teachings, and he expresses it so beautifully. Evalo kevalo tandu nadikaromo, avalo kavalo nammayundu. What that means is, to whatever extent sinking low we behave, to that extent there is goodness. The key word here is tandu. Tandu means sinking low, sinking deep, subsiding, it implies being humble. So the more we subside within and behave accordingly, to that extent there is goodness. So for Bhagavan, the root of all evil is our rising as ego. The root of all good is our subsiding. These are two things. So the more we inwardly subside and live our life accordingly, to that extent there is goodness. So Bhagavan doesn't ask us to do good actions. All he asks us is to subside back within. If we subside within, our outward behavior will reflect that. So automatically we'll be doing good actions. So we don't have to worry about doing good actions. All we have to concern ourselves about is subsiding within. And then in the final sentence, he says, Manate adaki kondirandal enge irandalum irakalam. That means if one is continuously restraining the mind, wherever one may be, one may be. The word he uses for constraining is adaki. Adaki is a causal verb. It's a causative form of a verb that means to subside or cease. So to the extent to which we curb or subdue or prevent our mind rising, if we are always preventing our mind from rising, wherever we may be, one may be. Enge irandala means wherever one may be. Irakalam means one can be in the sense of it is appropriate to be, it is proper to be. It can also mean let one be. So it has two meanings. One, so wherever one may be, or wherever one may be, let one be. So it both amount to the same thing. So the key point in Bhagavan's teaching is subduing ourself, ceasing to rise as ego. So that is what the primary lesson we have to learn from Bhagavan, how to subside more and more within. But Bhagavan exemplified that to the extent it is possible to exemplify it in his outward life. So if we consider how Bhagavan would behave in each situation and try to act accordingly, that is a good guide.